Oh.
Okay, go to your charge.
Oh, yes,
Okay, one of the other things I wanted to hit was we had talked about increasing the bed size to 4 residential facilities.
We're in favor.
Yes.
That's for any new facility, right?
For any new facility instead of just the 3-bed.
Why would we do that?
I think it had to do with viability and also people having, if you had groups that were 3, that people had a tendency 2 would pair off and 1 would be left out.
Why did we or why will we?
Why would we consider it?
Because MFP is also
It's 4.
Yeah, MFP is set at 4
consistency
beds.
with that.
Yeah.
And everything else.
What's your hesitation one?
It seems 3 seemed arbitrary and capricious to us. Why 3?
Well, I mean, I think the fewer numbers you could go, the better. That's just my big picture sort of thinking on it. I get with providers, I get the money piece of it, but I think anytime you force people to live in a group, the fewer people that they have to live with, the better we are. It's just, I mean, I know that's very simplistic, and it probably doesn't address all the issues with the finances, and maybe 3 people is not the right number, so then maybe it's 2.
I think
And I know providers wouldn't like that. I get that, but if we're
It's
really
cost.
talking
Part of
about
it's cost.
what's best for people and what's best practice.
But if we were trying to do the best for people, we would have none of it.
Well, that's true too. Well, I don't know.
No, we would have no, I would argue very strongly we have no number. Because that would be a choice question, and that's what people say. So we have made some value judgments about size that I think are legitimate issues. I think they are, and that's out of it. I think the perspective that I would bring is that, and I would bring this on the home living-based standards, that there is not a bucket of money that the federal government is going to give to the state of North Carolina to comply with what some people believe that the home and community-based standards describe, which would be a radical reduction in the size of places where people live. I would contend that if that's what we do, which you would essentially guarantee is that there will be no out-of-home placements ever again. That's probably too much. There will be no out-of-home placements in North Carolina for the next 10 years, if you would comply with that, because the money just isn't work. We have made a decision and continue to make a decision. We will allow group living. And if we're going to do that, it seems that consistent with MFP guidelines and with the ability to at least have some efficiencies in terms of the number of folks living in place, makes some sense. And I'll tell you, we are struggling through this whole group home report that we have to provide back to the General Assembly around the personal care issue. And one of the things I think we can all agree on is that there is a finite amount of money that we can put on the board, and it creates more and more difficulties to do that. So I think that the point I would go to, Rose, in my opinion, is that is the difference between 1 and 3 that significant in terms of the dynamics of a home, but it is significant in terms of the dynamics of being able to afford to provide that. And I think that's the rationale for us thinking about it. But
Rose, I heard a really interesting comment about this from self-advocates. The self-advocates said more and more people want a date and someday perhaps like to be married. And if it's 3 people, there's always an odd person out. And that was something I had never, ever thought about. But, you know, I think Dave's rationale is the stronger rationale. And it's very interesting that you're a self-advocate for that.
How is it different than shared living? Going back to our initial.
Louder, please.
How is it different than shared living? That initial new definition, really. How is the
residential support is a provider-owned facility. It's not an individual's own home. It requires licensure. Shared living would not require licensure because, for general statute, you can have up to 3 individuals, 3 adults living in a home, without having it licensed. So that buys us the flexibility of individuals who want to live together but can't afford to live on their own with the supports that they have, but don't want the ability to be able to choose their provider without having it dictate where they live.
We had written some things in the comments that I'd sent to Renee that talked about home size, maximum capacity, where I wrote, must meet home and community-based characteristics in new homes of 4 beds or less, for new ones, and existing homes of 6 beds or less, at no more than the home's current licensed capacity or consistent with the federal requirements if funding is inadequate to develop these smaller living options. So the federal government says that 4 is allowable. State of North Carolina should take that 4, and then if we've got special funding where we can do smaller than 4, it's more appropriate, then we should. But we are not approaching a period of time where we're going to have additional funding than we currently have. If anything, things have tightened in the last several years, and looks like they're going to continue to tighten. And went on to say home options should be approved at the state level, and LME MCOs should make prompt referrals when openings become available, or openings will threaten the residential option for the other people living in the home. Providers would be unable to sustain the cost of the homes without adequate funds. So we've got to, if there is a person moves out, we've got to be able to promptly get a referral, move somebody in, or else you put the other people that are living in the home at risk for that size option. So whatever formulas we're going to have for residential options, we, I think, need to adhere to that principle. And that'll be in our official feedback.
Other thoughts? You guys got terribly quiet.
What is this, what heading is this particular conversation under?
This is general.
It's in the general.
General changes. What we wanted to look at were general waiver changes and things that were outside of the service definition that had gone to the service definition committee to review.
So the
This
residential
falls into residential, it falls into, like, I think section appendix C1 or C3, where we have our maximum bed size. Okay. There's discussion on community transition, changing it to once per life of the waiver instead of once per lifetime. The community transition is utilized to move out of an ICF or another facility into your own home. And it is currently once per lifetime. And this would allow people, if they moved back into a facility and later on moved back out. What do you think?
I think that's a good idea. Yep.
And what was the new option called? We have one per lifetime versus the
Life of the
life of the waiver. Okay.
Under specialized consultation, I know we're talking, that definition is being worked, but I wanted to ask, sometimes now we have individuals who have evaluations like a PT or an OT evaluation and then don't have enough evaluation visits under the state plan to have an evaluation done for a home modification or vehicle lift or a piece of equipment. I'd like to put in the definition that this can be used. We've been allowing it with those appropriate professionals, but I'd like to make it clear in the definition that this extends those state plan visits for evaluation when they're exhausted.
That makes sense.
Well, and for regular state plan Medicaid for adults, I mean, it's one. I mean, and that one isn't sort of a freebie. I mean, it has other guidelines against it too, like it has to be injured or it's really hard to get an adult a PTO eval, period.
And I think if we make it clear in the definition, then more people will take advantage of that to get the equipment in the months that they need.
I think that's really important too, as people are aging and they have changing needs that happen.
Yes, Mary?
When Katie and I moved from Davidson to Taylorsville, it was sort of on an urgent basis. And the Davidson house was built with a ramp. The Taylorsville house had stairs. And for us to be able to move into the Taylorsville house, I needed a chairlift. So I just paid for it. Because otherwise, I guess we'd be camping at the local park while we got a PT evaluation. And so shouldn't the waiver take into account some way of retroactively approving that kind of a home modification? Although I do sometimes ride up and down the chairlift myself, and when I do that, I think, well, even if the LME-MCO installed a hidden camera and caught me riding the lift, I'd be able to say, you didn't pay for it. So, but I'm just saying, sometimes there are just emergent things. Like if the shower bar thing pulls out of the wall, and so that needs to be replaced, and you need to do maybe some structural changes, and the way the waiver's written, I've got to get some sort of PT thing, and I mean, it's just hoops that don't make sense, just saying.
Understood. And there are some rules within the waiver about prior approval and having to get prior approval for services. And also, there have been some home modifications that I know about that have been done kind of on the side that weren't approved, that meant wayward. So it is important to get somebody in there who knows and get a bonded contractor and everything. But if there's a way to make it more flexible, we'll look at it.
Right, just some way to claw back a portion of something.
Yeah, I'm not too certain that we can do it without the prior approval. But maybe some looking at it ahead of time and seeing how quickly we get somebody to look at it, before you move it.
And expedited.
I mean, sometimes it's just about common sense, right? Because we have had
Hello?
situations like that where a person might need a piece of equipment not covered by DME that we have had to process quickly because it was a health and safety issue, and we might have chosen to forego an evaluation, but approved it anyway. In an expedited process, because without it, they couldn't get a bath, which is a health and safety problem. And they had it, but the old thing broke, and it needed to be replaced. Whatever. I'm just using that as hypothetical. I don't actually remember them. But we've had cases like that where it was just a common sense thing. Clearly, the person needed it. We could have waited around for a PT assessment, but they were going to go without something they really needed for health and safety while we maybe go through that hoop.
It's like when you have a lift breakdown and it needs repair, and you just go with the doctor signing off on it. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. But it's common sense. I mean, you can't really say, oh, well, I'm sorry, you can't take a bath for a month until we get a PT up here. That's really up. Don't know where that is. It's in Georgia. There are PTs in there. I wouldn't want to wait for that.
What else about PT, OT type topics over here? Okay, there will be some changes to Appendix G. I know this is going to be fascinating. That's on rights, restrictive procedures, incident reporting, because with DMH changing their process of the level 1 incidents not being reported up to Raleigh, we're going to have to change the performance measure, and we're going to have to being level 2s and level 3s, and then we'll have to change the process to show that it mirrors what DMH's process is.
So does that mean the backup staffing is no longer going to be reported?
That is, the backup staffing was reported as a level 1 incident, which means that it's still like other level 1 incidents being maintained at the provider level, but they are reporting them to the MCO on a bi-weekly basis. So we'll clarify that in the waiver as well.
But then that wouldn't go from the LME-MCO up here to Raleigh?
Not through the IRIS process.
Okay.
They're reported, the way it reads in the waiver, the backup staffing are reported as level 1 incidents, but they're not part of the IRIS system.
They're not now, they don't go up there now.
So,
I didn't realize they weren't going up now. Well,
so let me ask you if there's anything you want to put on a list for next time. If there's anything you think of when you're driving on your way home, please send it. Feel free to look at all 217 pages of the waiver.
Dan, last time we talked about the school stuff and the provider's home and all that kind of stuff. Where in the waiver will that stuff fall?
That would probably be in C as well, and it would say no duplication of IDEA or Rehabilitation Act covered services. And it notes that transportation to and from the school is the responsibility of the school system. And that way we're not getting into the duplication issue with the federal government.
That was a good phrase. No duplication of, could we repeat that? No duplication of?
No duplication of IDEA or the Rehabilitation Act covered services.
Is transportation something that we can look at?
You want to look at, transportation?
Yes, and just it being embedded in certain definitions and the hardship that causes. Because that's a real big provider complaint.
yes, yes.
And family complaint for families who are outside of certain areas. And I would also throw out there, looking at the training requirements or forms that need to be filled out, really just maybe looking at that to see what maybe need to be updated, or are there service-specific things that we think maybe a training requirement would need to be in versus something else? I don't know. Just coming up with thinking about, with all these changes with HCBS and residential, maybe there needs to be some training centered around that piece. That, and also would like to look at the quarterly progress note.
Oh, I must not have mentioned that at the beginning. It must have been in my head. Did I say that to you? I said it to you. Yes, getting rid of the quarterly report. Does anybody have an issue with getting rid of the quarterly report?
Absolutely not.
No.
Going once? Okay.
Yeah.
I concur. So, think about it, those things that don't seem to fall into a certain definition or don't fall into one of the topics that we've covered with the groups, just kind of get those together and send them.
And the relative as direct support employee, that's
Yes.
still coming up?
Yes, that would
Okay.
be probably longer than to fit in with one meeting.
Is there a group working on that, or is that something that you guys are just going to handle at this thing?
We're going to just have to put something together for each group.
Okay, because I didn't think that wasn't in one of the assigned service
No, but
policy.
I have it on my list. So any thoughts you have on that as well? And then, of course, there are some things that have changed over the past year. CMS has changed the requirement for spousal impoverishment. They have to change that in the waiver. There's a regulation around it. I can bring it back if you're interested. They've also changed the formatting of some of the quality measures in the waiver, the performance measures. Those will also be changes that we make.
What I'd like to request in terms of the performance measures, if the NCOs could be, if we could have a work group or something around those. Because some of those they don't make sense, they don't really measure anything of any real quality. That would be my request.
Yeah.
And I understand, and I know that a lot of the measures, if you are at the MCO or if you just don't sleep at night and you read the waiver, you'll see that there's performance measures on everybody gets a level of care. And we have to have the percentage of people who got their level of care versus the number of people you brought onto the waiver. And you should never see somebody coming onto the waiver without a level of care. But it's a CMS requirement that we have to have that in there. So some of them are very dry.
So if you do a separate work group on that, we would like to be on it, but I'm understanding you're just going to bring us some revisions.
Yeah, we can show you anything. I'm just telling you that these are upcoming changes that we were supposed to make during the next technical amendment to CMS sent out guidance.
But is there a group speaking around performance measures? And I think, speak to what Rose is around more outcome-based, not process-based.
I think that's something that we have to get together, and I think that's kind of like phase 2. This is just the standard performance measures for the process. Everybody has an ISP. Everybody signs a freedom of choice statement.
So any revisions you're thinking, that would be great to see them.
Okay. Anybody have anything else on their mind before I let you go to get home before the weather freezes the car right there?
The wind chill factor
Yes.
of a wet car driving down.